Hi everyone, this is Jim. Before I get started on this video, I wanted to mention that this will be my last upload for a while. I'm going to be traveling over the holidays and I'll be away from my computer. So for those of you in the US, have a safe and happy 4th of July holiday. And well, I will see you when I get back. Let's see. This is the last game I wanted to look at from the Edmonton International Tournament, and this is the key game that decided the top position, the winner of the tournament. The two players are Sam Shankland, the Grandmaster from the United States with the white pieces, and Surya Ganguly, the Grandmaster from India with the black pieces. Ganguly is slightly higher rated than Sam, but basically their ratings are very comparable. They're both around 2650, so pretty high rated Grandmasters. Sam starts off with d4, and Ganguly plays knight f6. Shankland goes c4, and Ganguly goes e6, and now Sam goes knight to c3, allowing the Nimzo Indian, so not avoiding it with knight f3. But Surya Ganguly has something different in mind. He doesn't go for the Nimzo Indian, but goes for the Queen's Gambit with d5. So we can stop at this moment and talk a little bit about the tournament situation. At this point, this was played in round 8. Ganguly was half a point ahead of Sam Shankland and really just needed a draw to stay a half point ahead and have good chances of winning. But, a win would be even better, but a draw would certainly be satisfactory, whereas Sam certainly needs to win in order to catch up with Surya Ganguly. So it's interesting that Sam chose to play the exchange variation here. He took the pawn because this has kind of a drawish reputation. And, the main way of playing here is to take back with the pawn. He takes d5 and bishop to g5, c6, and e3 is standard position that has been reached many times. This pawn structure is known as the Carlsbad structure, with these two rows of pawns, two diagonals of pawns opposing each other in a way on other opposite sides of the boards, on the queen side versus the middle and king side. What this gives is it gives opportunities for white to attack with these two pawns. This is the famous minority attack where white pushes those pawns forward and tries to create weaknesses over here. But black has an open diagonal for his light squared bishop as well as for his dark squared bishop. So black has pretty active pieces. He just has to be a little bit careful about these ideas with the minority attack. But there's a position that has been reached many times, and black should be fine. So maybe Sam is he's avoiding such a well-known position, but certainly the exchange variation has been played many times. The next unusual move, though, comes from Ganguly. Ganguly does not take back with the pawn, maybe expecting some kind of preparation from Sam Shankland, avoids it all by playing the rare move knight takes d5. And so we're getting into pretty unusual territory already on move 4. But this has been seen before. White plays the main move here, which is e4, kicking this knight, and the knight doesn't want to retreat. Now the idea with this is to keep coming forward and set up this big pawn structure for white, allow this big pawn structure, but then start to undermine it immediately with c5. So if you've ever seen the Grinfeld defense, this position ought to remind you of the Grinfeld. The main difference is that black has not fianchettoed this bishop. That would be the Grinfeld with the bishop fianchettoed here, adding to the pressure on the center. So, but other than that, it looks like a lot of the ideas are very similar to the Grinfeld. And Sam plays the move rook b1, which is also seen in the Grinfeld, getting the rook off of that diagonal. Although in this position, the most common move here is knight to f3. And games have been played before in this kind of line where black takes and then gets this bishop out with tempo, bishop b4 check, bishop d2, exchanges off the dark squared bishop, queen takes, castles, and then white plays bishop to c4, and black will develop a piece next. Looks like white has a little more space and a slight edge in development, but it's not big. It's black's turn to move, and black will be able to develop a piece, and white hasn't castled yet, so not a huge lead in development. And also this pawn on d4 here seems like it might be a bit fragile. It has to be supported by pieces, and it's going to come under some fire. So, but that's the main way of playing this position. Seems like it's pretty well balanced, actually. Uh, so anyway, rook to b1 is a bit of a rare move here. And after that, Ganguly plays bishop e7, and Sam plays bishop to c4. And already on move 8, we're in a position that has not been seen before. It's not in the database. It hasn't been played at the top level before. So only on move 8. That's pretty interesting, especially compared to the last couple of games where we saw the first 20 moves were all known theory. Let's see. The move in this position that has been played before is knight f3, also a very logical move. But bishop c4 is a fine move here. And it's almost like Sam is playing the white side of a Grunfeld. We'll see this in the next move as well. Black castles and white plays knight to e2. And this knight e2 and bishop c4 is a setup that I often use myself against the Grunfeld. One idea in the Grunfeld is, well, this pawn isn't here, so the bishop is coming out to pin that knight, and you can always kick it back with f3. Here I'm not so sure, but, well, the knight has squares it can go to from e2, so perhaps that's more to the point. The knight can come out to g3 or to f4, as happens in the game. Anyway, knight to c6, logical play from black, going after the center. Sam castles, and b6, preparing to fianchetto the light-squared bishop. This bishop develops to e3, this bishop goes to b7. So everybody castled and got their pieces, their minor pieces, off the back rank. So it looks like a pretty even position. And, well, it's still interesting. It still has this, pawn structure, which is going to be undermined by black. And black seems to have good diagonals for his bishops. This bishop, the light-squared bishop, was blocked in for a while by the pawn on e6, but now it's outside that pawn chain. But, well, something happens pretty quickly here. After knight f4, there's this exchange. C takes d4, c takes d4, and black plays rook to c8 here. So before we get to rook to c8, let's mention the top choice of the chess engine here is to play bishop to g5. And it thinks this position is really completely even. It thinks that black has enough activity here, and white's advantage in space is not going to amount to a whole lot. Or perhaps the advantage in space is compensated for by the slight weakness of the d4 pawn. In any case, it thinks that black is fine in this position, and it's about even. It also thinks that black is fine after rook to c8. But there is a tactic here that white has. So why don't you take a second to look at this position, see if you can spot the tactic, and see if you think it's a good idea to play the tactic after you spot it. Okay, pause the video to have some time to think about it. I'm going to give the answer away now. The tactic is the sacrifice on e6. Knight takes e6, pawn takes, bishop takes. And now we see that rook c8 allowed this tactic because it set up this fork between the bishop and between the king and the rook with the bishop. So the king is in check, it moves to h8, and Sam grabs the rook, and the queen takes. So this is a position you had to see when you calculated that, and then you had to decide if this is good for white or not, if you wanted to play that tactic. From a pure material point of view, white got a rook and two pawns for two minor pieces, for a bishop and a knight. So that advantage slightly favors white. You know, the two minor pieces are worth more than a rook and one pawn, but slightly less than a rook and two pawns in general. But you always have to look at the specifics of the position, and the question is, you know, can the side with the rooks really use those to their best effect? And the rooks become more powerful as the board opens up, so they'll be strong later in the game. But there's already some open files and an open fourth rank. So there's already a lot of space, it seems, that the rooks have to maneuver in. So it seems like a pretty favorable position for the rooks. So I guess, you know, I think this is a good decision for white. And the chess engine gives white a slight edge here. So queen to a4 was played. And now Ganguly decides to go for a tactical solution to this position and plays the move b5. So maybe you want to see if you can spot the tactical idea behind this b5 move. Okay, I'm going to give the answer away now. Let's see. He played b5, and Sam took the pawn, and then Ganguly went with bishop to a6, skewering the two rooks. And something similar would have happened if queen takes, but well, Sam chose to play this way, so he can move this rook to b1, and after the bishop takes, then he took back with the queen. So he's got this battery lined up on the b file. And he's a whole piece down at this point, because first he gave up two pieces for a rook, and then he gave up the exchange. But so he's down a whole knight. But he has 3 pawns for the piece. These 3 pawns are extra. And in particular, these 2 pawns in the center are looking pretty strong. So it's interesting. I mean, I usually favor, I would usually prefer to play the side with the extra piece, particularly when there's so much force on the board. Because, well, you can kind of maneuver your pieces around. If you're not getting squashed immediately, you can kind of organize them and to attack those pawns, and you know, you have an extra piece, so you should be able to pick those pawns off one by one. Whereas if you get into the endgame, those pawns, and as the pawns get more advanced, it gets more and more difficult to deal with them. So really the top priority should be to find a way to pick off those pawns right away. And if black can do that, or start to get some pressure on those pawns, blockade them perhaps, then that black should be okay. But if he can't stop them, and if white trades down to an endgame, those extra pawns are often winning. So anyway, that's the general layout. Ganguly starts with h6. I guess the idea is he wants to be able to lift these pieces off the back rank without having mating threats against his king. So he gives the king a little bit of space. And notice this is a light square that the king can escape to, and white's bishop is on a dark square, so there's no bishop checks if the king has to run up to h7 there. Sam plays h3, maybe with a similar idea. Maybe the king may need some lift at a point, although, well, black potentially could cover that square, but I guess that would kind of provoke a pawn push, so maybe that h2 square is also safe for white's king. Anyway, a6 was played here. Cancel that. a6 was played, kicking the queen. And the queen went into b7, so maybe a6 was not the right idea here. Maybe black needs to search for some other plan, because after queen b7, it's really hard to avoid the queen trade. And for example, I mean, I looked at where can the queen go. The queen needs to keep defending this knight, so it's limited in where it can go to avoid a trade and still defend the knight. Queen to e8 is one possibility, and then the rook can activate, rook to e6. And it looks like it's just a dominating position for white's pieces. It's funny, even though white has one fewer pieces, the combination of these 2 pawns in the center and the activity of the queen and the rook, it looks like white is dominating, you know, 3/4 of the board here. So a tough position, and maybe there was no way around it. So the queen trade is pretty much forced here, and after queen takes b7, rook takes b7, Sam is one step closer to that winning endgame. Now Ganguly plays bishop to g5 here. Well, activating the bishop, maybe. Oh yeah, distracting white's bishop from the defense of the e-pawn. So I suppose black would be happy to suffer a little bit of pawn damage over here if he can get rid of one of this dynamic duo of pawns in the center. So Sam's not buying it. He holds on to this bishop and plays rook to c7, pressuring the knight. If he can drive the knight away, then he'll be safe to take off the bishop. The knight hops into b4, plays a3, kicking the knight again. The knight goes to d3, and then he plays e5. Cancel that. e5. Pushing this pawn forward. And this also takes squares away from the knight. The knight is now kind of limited. Notice that all these squares are covered, so the knight really doesn't have a lot of scope. It can go backwards, but it can't go forward back into the game. So kind of an interesting move there. This point, Ganguly plays rook to b8, trying to activate the rook, maybe get down here and harass the king. The king runs to h2 in advance. Ganguly puts his king up to h7, you know, getting away from checks on the back rank. And Sam keeps walking forward with the king. It's the endgame, and the kings need to be active, so king to g3. Now the rook goes back to f8, and rook to c6 was played, attacking the a-pawn over here. Ganguly doesn't respond to that right away, but he plays bishop to f6 check, f4 check. And so this is a pretty interesting move. The king can't go back to h2, so it's forced to, well, it could come forward, but is that really accomplishing anything? Maybe if it comes forward, it'll get harassed by these pawns anyway. No, the king goes to f3. And from f3, it has the idea of coming forward to help these pawns promote, or perhaps running back this way if necessary to get away from things. But, well, just walking into this discovered check, it just turns out there's nothing really great that that black can do. It does lose a pawn, so with this discovered check, black can win a pawn. And the way Ganguly chooses to win the pawn is with knight to e1 check. So hits the king this way. And he could have also, moved the bishop with check. The king goes to e4, and Ganguly grabs the pawn on g2. Maybe had ideas of taking the bishop off next and eliminating one of those pieces and trying to hold back these pawns with his remaining bishop and rook. Anyway, at this point, Sam is ignoring those threats to his bishop. Well, it's not a material loss, so maybe he's not afraid of those trades. He just pushes those center pawns forward, d5. So knight takes e3, going for a position where black will have a bishop and a rook against the pawns. F takes e3. And, of course, when there are pawns on both sides of the board, the bishop is the better piece to keep. So, and now black goes bishop to g3. But this seems to be losing at this point. And, black's position has been sort of gradually going downhill the last few moves. It's tough to find a single move that really turns things around for black. It's kind of a slippery slope. And if you look at various moves, like the chess engine at first thinks that bishop g5 is maybe okay, but as you look at it further and further, the evaluation just keeps climbing in favor of white. So, for example, after bishop g5, d6 can be played, pushing this pawn forward, and then say rook to f1, trying to harass the pawns from behind. The king can come forward to d4, and it's already threatening to maybe step in front of the pawns and help them promote. So it's starting to look very dangerous. And then what else could we try here? Instead of rook to f1, there's also rook to b8, trying to come in on the side, and then e6, getting a pair of pawns on the 6th rank. And those also look like they will be very difficult to stop. So just a tough position overall. Ganguly tried to move bishop to g3 instead of bishop to g5, kind of keeping the bishop over here with an eye on the pawns. But d6, these pawns just go forward, and there's no stopping them. Rook to e8, piling up on this pawn, but now d7. And there's no time to take this pawn. Black will not be able to stop the d pawn from queening. So even though that pawn goes with check, it's just no good. Black has to stop the pawn with his own rook, put it in place, and then now the e-pawn marches forward, e6. Bishop to h4 was tried, so bishop on the diagonal trying to stop the pawns from crossing that line, and the king marches forward, king to d5. This king comes around to g8, and now rook takes a6. So this rook is going to do a little bit of maneuvering to get into a better spot, but it might as well take off that a-pawn while black's pieces are all tied up, defending against these two central pawns. Who knows, that a-pawn may come in handy. We'll see in just a minute. The king comes over to f8. The rook drops back to a4. It's like I said, the rook is going to maneuver around it. It does this with tempo. It hits the bishop. So the bishop drops back to f6, staying on that diagonal. And now the rook comes over to c4. And here's the idea. He wants to come down next to that pawn on the 7th rank and get the rook supported on the 8th rank. The king steps up to e7, blockading those pawns. And now rook to c8. And of course, the rook cannot be taken because white will queen. And you don't want to move the rook away. Well, maybe you could move the rook away. I take that back because it will the rook and the king will still cover that d8 square. But anyway, Ganguly tried to move bishop to c5, just holding on to things here, the king holding on to the rook, and the bishop is going after one of the pawns here. But the a pawn starts marching forward. a4, the bishop grabs this pawn and takes a look over here. But Sam pushes on with a5. Ganguly plays h5. Sam plays king to c6. And Ganguly just resigns at this point. There's no stopping the pawns at this point. The king can't ever take over here. The king can't ever take this pawn because it loses the rook. So the king and the rook are pretty well tied down over here. Yeah, if the rook moves away, white will just trade off the rook and then queen the pawn. That's what will happen when the bishop is not on this diagonal anymore. So if black just shuffles the bishop back and forth, this pawn will come forward with the support of the king, and will win that bishop, and then the king can come back and trade off that rook and win with the extra pawns. So a simple win for white from this point, and Ganguly resigned. So with this win, Sam Shankland, he got a draw in the final round and went on to win the tournament. Actually, Sam Shankland and Surya Ganguly had identical scores of 8 points out of 9. With Sam, it was 7 wins and 2 draws, and with Surya, it was 8 wins and 1 loss. So both scores add up to 8 points, and Sam won on the tiebreaks, probably because of this head-to-head game that he played against Ganguly. So anyway, it was a very interesting tournament overall, and those were the final standings. Sam Shankland first place, Surya Ganguly in second place, and Alexei Shirov in third place. So congratulations to everyone and to the organizers for running such a great tournament. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, I will be gone for about a week. I will see you all when I get back.